There was a time where if you went to see a family film, there was a good chance it would be rated G by the Motion Picture Association. However, as time has gone on, that rating has been assigned to movies less and less. So I thought it would be interesting to look at the evolution of the G rating and how it's become either unwanted or difficult to attain. When Jack Valenti first implemented the rating system in 1968, the G rating was meant to signify the films for general audiences and did not feature anything too upsetting or inappropriate. Of course, it was still given some surprising films. Planet of the Apes was rated G, despite some of the violence and acts committed by the titular apes. In fact, of the 5 films in the series, the only one to not receive a G was Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey was also rated G, even though the film's opening sequences show early primitive men fighting each other, and later on a computer kills a bunch of astronauts in cold blood. Nonetheless, parents can mostly feel secure with taking their children to a G-rated film. For the most part, they went to Disney Pictures and animated films. The only animated movies that were granted higher ratings were ones that undeniably featured content inappropriate for children, like Ralph Bakshi's productions, or even ones that were a little too intense, like Watership Down. At a certain point, though, G did become synonymous with films aimed at younger viewers. Spielberg even filmed a scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind in which the lead protagonist's children respond with disinterest to seeing a re-release of Disney's Pinocchio because it's rated G. When Star Wars was initially submitted to the MPAA, it was given a G. Lucas and 20th Century Fox wanted the film to appeal to a wider audience, and were even surprised it received that rating, considering some of the action and violence in the movie. They requested Star Wars be given a PG instead, and their wish was granted. Interestingly enough, Star Trek the Motion Picture was given a G rating on original release. A little surprising, considering a few of the discussions the characters have, and an infamous scene involving a transporter malfunction. The Best Picture winner, Chariots of Fire, has nothing inappropriate in it, and is perfectly acceptable viewing for all ages, and should be rated G. However, the filmmakers did not want people to perceive it as a children's film, so it added in a scene containing a swear word just so they could guarantee a PG. One director who always expected his movies to wind up with a PG, only to be surprised with a G, was Don Bluth. With movies like The Secret of Nim, An American Tail, The Land Before Time, and All Dogs Go to Heaven, there were often a few scenes he thought might be seen as too intense for young children. Although for some of his films he was required by the distributor and producers to make cuts anyway, since the PG used to be seen as box office poison for an animated film. In fact, it was not until Bluth's last animated feature, Titan A.E., that he finally got a PG. One studio that especially did not want the animated films to get a PG was Disney. This can probably be blamed on The Black Cauldron's poor box office performance. That was the first PG-rated Disney animated film. Its massive failure scared Disney from ever wanting to release any piece of animation that was not rated G. The Nightmare Before Christmas was even moved to Touchstone Pictures due to its PG rating, and their fear of releasing it under the Disney brand. The Hunchback of Notre Dame did receive a PG on initial screening, but because they were intent on it being a G, the filmmakers have said they had to alter a few sound effects to get it down to Disney's desired rating. Nowadays, most of the Disney Renaissance movies would probably get a PG, especially Mulan for its war scenes, Hercules for the monster battles, and Tarzan for the action and the villain's defeat. The studio that eventually got the ball rolling to prove a PG animated film could still be commercially successful was DreamWorks. Jeffrey Katzenberg wanted their animated films to have an edginess, and so with the exception of Chicken Run and Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron, DWA's first batch of features were rated PG. Eventually, even Disney became okay with their animated films being rated PG. It certainly made sense for Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and Treasure Planet, less so for Home on the Range. Pixar, on the other hand, stuck around in G territory, and they did not lose their audience as a result of this. The first Pixar film to get a PG was The Incredibles, for logical reasons, and then following that, Up. I've mostly talked about family films, but it was not unusual to occasionally see a drama released with a G rating. David Lynch directed a G-rated movie, The Straight Story, a sweet film about an elderly man who travels cross-country to visit his sick brother. Another example is The Rookie, a baseball movie about a 35-year-old teacher with great pitching skills. However, during the 2010s and 2020s, it does seem like the MPAA has gotten stricter, and that can partly be attributed to a few things. One reason is actually because of the studios. Since they don't want their movies to be seen as just for children, which the G rating is often stereotyped as, they will usually request the filmmakers to add a little something to bump the rating up. Or they will ask to receive a PG for something as mild as thematic elements. Here's some advice. If you see that as the sole ratings reason, then it's actually a G movie, and there's nothing inappropriate in it. The only exception among studios, curiously enough, is 20th Century Fox. Horton Hears a Who was rated G, as were the Rio movies. Rio actually got a PG in the first go-around, but Fox appealed the MPAA to give it a G. It's a rare case nowadays of a studio wanting their family film to be rated G. Even Disney does not seem to want the G anymore, outside of nature documentaries and a few Pixar releases. The Peanuts movie also got a G, something the filmmakers even promised they would try to get in pre-release interviews. The Alvin and the Chipmunks franchise is an interesting case. The first, second, and fourth movies were rated PG, all for mild, rude humor. However, the third film, Chipwreck, got a G, even though the style of humor isn't that different from what was shown in the other films. So I'm not sure why that one was specifically seen as a milder entry. The other reason the MPAA has gotten 2 0 with Gs is actually because of Pixar. Toy Story 3 was rated G, like the first two, but the MPAA then got calls from parents complaining that it was too intense for their children. The famous incinerator scene is probably a likely culprit. The prison-like atmosphere of the daycare sequences is another possible reason. According to the former head of the ratings board, Cars 2 actually came down to a split vote, but it was ultimately decided to go with a G, despite the spy action featured in the film. Once again, parents complained. And since then, Pixar and most other animated films have been rubber-stamped with a PG. Ironically, the only Pixar films to be rated G in the last 10 years are Cars 3 and Toy Story 4. I can certainly understand giving a PG to movies like Brave and Into the Spider-Verse and anything coming out of Laika Studios. But is there anything in the Lorax, or the Shaun the Sheep movie, or My Little Pony the movie that warrants a rating higher than G? I don't think so. Even The Wizard of Oz was rated PG for its 3D re-release, even though children have been enjoying that movie for several decades. The MPAA is so harsh nowadays, it's gotten to the point that I was pleasantly surprised Paw Patrol the movie received a G. It's fascinating to think there was a time when films had to actually earn a PG. When you look at 80s and 90s movies with PG ratings, it made sense why many got those. Whether it was the more risque adult humor in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, or the creepy and frightening scenes featured in Return to Oz, or the slapstick violence and profanity in Home Alone. Ever watch the PG-rated Goonies and notice how many times characters say the S-word? It's a lot. Saying a film needed parental guidance was a good word of caution, but the MPAA now feels a burp or someone saying shut up is enough to warrant parental guidance, which is silly. There are plenty of family-friendly films being released these days, where material that's more than acceptable for young children. The only reason a 5-year-old needs adult or teenage accompaniment in order to watch The Boss Baby is because 5-year-olds should not be left alone in a movie theater. It's a shame the G rating has become so rarely used, because it could still apply to many new movies that have nothing offensive. But the MPAA does not want to face the wrath of potentially offended parents, and studios want to attract an older audience. The scales have slightly moved up for other ratings too, as I've noticed occasional movies with PG content being bumped up to PG-13. 20 or even 10 years ago, Cruella would have absolutely gotten a PG. I saw nothing that seriously warranted a PG-13, but the MPAA disagreed. Will we ever see the G rating again outside of nature documentaries and maybe a Pixar film? Only if the ratings board finds absolutely nothing potentially objectionable or the studio appeals for one. Sadly, both appear to be rare occurrences. There was a time when G meant, hey, everyone can see this movie. But now it means, well, nobody says anything mildly rude to someone. See you next time.